I never thought I'd be standing here again, at 55 years old, staring at my parents' weathered front door. After 2 decades of distance, my name's Carol, and this house holds memories I've tried desperately to forget. The weight of my smartphone feels unusually heavy in my hand, still warm from my mother Martha's unexpected call asking me to come over urgently. Behind me, my sensible sedan sits in the driveway, and I can't help but think about my 16-year-old daughter, Sarah, who I just dropped off at my friend Maria's place. "It'll only take a couple of hours," I had told Sarah, trying to sound more confident than I felt, though the slight tremor in my voice probably gave me away. The last time I properly spoke to my parents was at my grandmother's funeral 5 years ago. Before that, it was that terrible day when I was 35, when they chose my sister, Diane, over me. I still remember standing in this very spot, tears streaming down my face, as they told me they were giving my college fund to Diane for her wedding. "But it's my education," I had screamed, my voice breaking. "Your sister needs a proper wedding," Mom had said firmly, her lips pressed into that familiar thin line of disapproval. "You can take out student loans like everyone else." I left that day and never really came back. My grandmother was the only one who stood by me. She helped me pay for community college, not the prestigious university I had dreamed of, but it was something. I worked hard, got my degree, and built my own life, brick by painful brick. The 20 years that followed were a blur of determination and small victories. I met Robert, my ex-husband, during my final year of college. We got married, had Sarah, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. Even after our divorce 10 years ago, things stayed civilized. Robert pays good alimony, and we both put Sarah first. Now, at 55, I'm doing okay. The accounting firm where I've worked for the past 20 years has been hinting at a promotion. Between that, the alimony, and my part-time consulting work, I can afford to spend plenty of time with Sarah and still save for her medical school dreams. Taking a deep breath, I finally ring the doorbell, the same chime I remember from my childhood. Whatever they want, I tell myself, I'm not that terrified 35-year-old anymore. I'm a woman who's built her own life, who's raised a remarkable daughter, who doesn't need their approval anymore. At least that's what I keep telling myself. "Carol, you came." Martha opens the door, and her enthusiasm catches me off guard. She looks much older than I remember, her once vibrant auburn hair now completely gray, deep lines etched around her eyes and mouth. Dad stands behind her, attempting a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes, his shoulders slightly stooped with age. At 78, John looks far more fragile than the strong fire chief I remember from my childhood. "Where's Sarah?" Mom asks, peering around me with hopeful eyes. "I would love to see my granddaughter." "She's at a friend's," I cut her off, stepping inside and immediately feeling the weight of 20 years pressing down on me. "You said it was urgent, Martha." The house smells the same, Mom's vanilla air freshener mixing with Dad's coffee. They lead me to the living room, and I notice how everything looks worn down, faded. The fancy furniture they bought for Diane's wedding is showing its age, the upholstery threadbare in spots, the coffee table scratched and dull. "Would you like some tea?" Mom asks, wringing her hands nervously, her wedding ring loose on her thinner finger. "Just tell me why you called," I say, remaining standing, my handbag clutched tightly against my side like armor. "It's been years, and suddenly it's urgent." Mom starts crying, not the quiet tears I remember from my childhood, but deep, body-shaking sobs that make her seem suddenly older and more vulnerable. Dad puts his arm around her, his hand trembling slightly, and I feel my stomach tighten with a mix of concern and wariness. "We're going to lose the house," he finally says, his voice raspy with age and emotion. I wait, knowing there's more. There's always more with them. "Your sister," Mom begins, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, and I feel that familiar twist in my gut. Of course, it's about Diane. It's always been about Diane. She asked us to take out a business loan for her husband, for Greg's IT startup. We used the house as collateral. Dad explains, looking everywhere but at me, his fingers nervously tapping against his knee. The business went under 6 months ago. Let me guess, I say, my voice flat as I cross my arms. Diane is not paying. Greg's business went bankrupt. Dad nods slowly, the motion seeming painful. Diane and the kids are struggling. They've stopped making payments, and we can't cover it ourselves with our retirement income. The medical bills from my back surgery last year took most of our savings. I start laughing, the sound harsh even to my own ears, and they both look at me like I've lost my mind. Maybe I have. After 20 years, nothing has changed. So you called me, the daughter you abandoned, the one whose education fund you gave away, to bail you out of another mess Diane created? The words taste bitter on my tongue. We know you're doing well, Mom says quickly, wiping her eyes. Your job at the accounting firm, the consulting work, we wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate. I stand there, looking at these people who chose my sister over me at every turn, who didn't attend my small wedding, who barely acknowledged me at my grandmother's funeral because Diane was dealing with her first divorce. I'll think about it, I hear myself say, and I'm as surprised as they are by my words. I need to pick up Sarah. Leaving parents' house, as I drive away, the late afternoon sun glinting off my rearview mirror, I can't shake the feeling that I'm about to make either the biggest mistake or the most important decision of my life. Either way, nothing would ever be the same again. My knuckles turn white as I grip the steering wheel, the conversation with my parents playing on repeat in my mind. Mom, why are you crying? Sarah asked as soon as I picked her up from Maria's house. My daughter has always been perceptive, too perceptive sometimes. With her dark, intelligent eyes and analytical mind, she reminds me of my younger self before my dreams were derailed. I quickly wiped my eyes, not even realizing I'd been crying during the drive. Just thinking about some difficult decisions, sweetie, I said, trying to sound casual. Actually, I saw your grandparents today. Sarah's eyes lit up instantly. At 16, she's starting to wonder about her roots, her family history beyond just Robert and me. Really? The ones from the old photos? Can I meet them? I'm gathering family medical history for my pre-med research project. Of course she'd want to meet them. They were her grandparents, even if they'd never bothered to be part of her life. And of course she'd immediately think of her medical school ambitions, the dream I'd never gotten to pursue. A week later, I spent the next week wrestling with my thoughts, barely sleeping, playing out every possible scenario in my head. The promotion at work was within reach. Peyton had all but confirmed it yesterday, but it would mean more travel, more responsibility. And now this situation with my parents' house. You're insane, Maria told me over coffee in her kitchen, the morning light highlighting the concern in her eyes. After everything they did? After how they always chose Diane? Maybe I am, I admitted, running my finger around the rim of my coffee mug. But Sarah deserves a chance to know her grandparents before it's too late. And honestly, maybe I need this too, to finally face it all. They're in their 70s now. How many years do they have left? So, a week later, I found myself driving back to my parents' house, this time with Sarah bouncing excitedly in the passenger seat, her biology textbook forgotten in her lap. She'd spent the morning asking questions about her grandparents, what they were like, what they did before retirement, whether her grandfather's chess skills were really as good as I'd reluctantly mentioned. The reunion was strange. Mom burst into tears again, her hands trembling as she reached for Sarah, and Dad just stood there awkwardly, leaning slightly on his cane before Sarah broke the ice by stepping forward and hugging them both. They looked shocked, then delighted, and for a moment, I saw genuine joy in their eyes, the kind I used to see directed at Diane. We spent the afternoon there, and I watched as Sarah charmed them completely with her intelligence and warmth. She showed them her academic awards, told them about her advanced placement classes, about her volunteer work at the local hospital, about her dreams of becoming a surgeon. They listened to every word, and I saw something I hadn't expected: regret in their eyes when they looked at me, seeing the reflection of what could have been. The decision, that evening, as Sarah chattered happily about her grandparents on the drive home, I made my decision. Maybe I was crazy, maybe I was setting myself up for more hurt, but I was going to help them. There was something about seeing Sarah connect with them that made me realize time was running out for any kind of resolution. The next day, I called my real estate agent and arranged to rent out my apartment again. Then I called Mom. My heart pounded as I heard the phone ring, old insecurities threatening to resurface. "I'll help with the loan payments," I said before I could change my mind, my voice firm despite my internal conflict. "Sarah and I are moving in. My rental income will go toward the loan payments. I'll help with bills too, but we need to set some boundaries, Martha." There was silence on the other end, then Mom started crying again. "Thank you, Carol. Thank you so much," she sobbed. I could hear Dad in the background asking what was happening. "You don't know what this means to us." But I did know. It meant they wouldn't lose their home of 40 years. It meant they wouldn't have to face Diane's failure. It meant they were still choosing the path of least resistance. Within 2 weeks, Sarah and I had moved in. I bought new appliances for the house: a refrigerator with an ice maker that Sarah loved, a dishwasher that actually worked, and a washing machine that didn't sound like it was about to explode. I also installed handrails in the bathroom for Dad, whose back problems had worsened with age. His posture improved once he didn't have to bend over to hand wash dishes anymore, and Mom seemed genuinely happy to have us there. Life fell into a surprisingly comfortable routine over the next few months. Mom started making breakfast for everyone, and despite my initial reservations, I had to admit it was nice coming downstairs to fresh coffee and pancakes after decades of eating breakfast alone or just with Sarah. She picked Sarah up from school when I worked late, helped her with homework, and even started teaching her to bake, something I'd never had the patience for. Dad switched to part-time consulting work at the fire department, his constant back aches finally getting better with less physical strain. He taught Sarah how to play chess, something I'd never learned, and their weekly matches became a tradition that filled the house with laughter I hadn't heard in years. I found myself working more hours at the accounting firm, knowing Sarah was well taken care of. Peyton Thompson, my boss, called me into his office one afternoon as the spring sun streamed through the windows. "We've been noticing your increased dedication lately," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "The Milwaukee client specifically requested you for their audit. How would you feel about a senior manager position? It would mean heading our nonprofit division." The new position meant more money, but also more responsibility, including regular business trips to other states for client meetings and audits. In the past, I would have turned it down immediately. Single mom, no support system, it wouldn't have worked. "I'll take it," I said, surprising myself with how confident I felt. After 20 years of putting my career second, it felt like my time had finally come. The first time I had to leave for a business trip, I was a nervous wreck. 3 days in Chicago felt like an eternity. "She'll be fine," I said to myself, probably 100 times as I packed my suitcase. "Mom and Dad will take care of her." And they did. Mom sent me pictures of Sarah doing homework, having dinner, playing chess with Dad. It worked. It all worked, and for the first time in decades, I felt like I could breathe, like I could finally pursue my own ambitions without sacrificing Sarah's well-being. Growing tensions, but there were moments, little things that made me uneasy, like when Mom would get phone calls from Diane and disappear into her room, emerging with red-rimmed eyes, or when I'd find bank transfer notifications on Mom's phone while setting up her new tablet, money going to Diane's account despite their financial struggles. "She needs help sometimes," Mom defended when I confronted her about it one evening after Sarah had gone to bed. We stood in the kitchen, the dishwasher humming between us like a barrier. She's going through a rough patch with Greg. You know how difficult second marriages can be. Mom, I'm paying all your bills and the loan that Diane defaulted on, I said, trying to keep my voice level despite the familiar anger rising within me. I'm helping you manage Dad's medications and doctor appointments. How is it fair that you're sending her money that you don't even have? You don't understand, Mom snapped, suddenly defensive, her shoulders tense beneath her cardigan. Diane is not to blame for Greg's business failing. She has 2 teenagers to feed. College-aged kids are expensive. And I have 1 teen and all your bills to feed, I shot back, the familiar feeling of being second best burning in my chest. Sarah's medical school will cost a fortune, and I'm saving every penny while supporting this household. But Mom had already turned away, shutting down the conversation like she always did when it came to Diane. These arguments became more frequent as the months passed, but I tried to ignore them. Sarah was happy. I was advancing in my career with quarterly trips to the Chicago and Milwaukee offices, and most days it felt like we were healing old wounds. Dad even apologized one night, after a few glasses of wine, for what happened with my college fund 20 years ago. We made mistakes, he said, staring into his glass, his hands shaking slightly with the early signs of what I suspected might be Parkinson's disease. Big ones. I've regretted it ever since you left. His eyes, clouded with cataracts that needed surgery we couldn't yet afford, met mine briefly. Watching Sarah, seeing how bright she is, it makes me wonder what you could have become if we'd supported you the same way. I wanted to say more, to finally have that conversation we'd been avoiding for 2 decades, but Mom quickly changed the subject to Sarah's upcoming science fair project. The moment was lost, like so many others in this house. 3 years passed this way. Sarah turned 19, looking more grown-up every day as she prepared for college applications. Her dream of medical school was within reach with her perfect GPA and volunteer hours at the hospital. I got used to my new role at work, traveling every few weeks, but always coming home to a happy daughter who was thriving with the stability and support we'd created. The loan payments were steady, the bills were paid, and life was, if not perfect, at least stable. Then came that Tuesday evening. I remember it was Tuesday because I'd just closed a big account in Phoenix and caught an early flight home, wanting to surprise Sarah with the news that I'd secured an interview for her with a prominent surgeon at the university hospital. I could hear voices from the driveway, too many voices for our usually quiet household. Opening the front door, I stepped into chaos. There, sprawled on my parents' couch, the one I'd just had reupholstered last month with my bonus money, was Diane. Her blonde hair was expensively highlighted but poorly styled, her face showing the signs of her 58 years despite what looked like recent cosmetic work. Beside her were 2 teenagers I recognized from photos but had never met, my niece and nephew. Suitcases were scattered around the living room, and Diane was tapping away on her phone, a glass of wine dangling carelessly from her other hand, barely looking up as I entered. "Oh," she said, her tone making it clear I was interrupting something, her eyes narrowing as they took in my business suit and briefcase. "Look who's here. The prodigal daughter returns." And just like that, I knew everything was about to change again. Only this time, I wasn't that naive 35-year-old, and I wasn't going to let history repeat itself. Confrontation, I left Greg, Diane announced lazily from the couch, swirling her wine glass as if she was commenting on the weather. The red liquid sloshed dangerously close to the edge. "He's a complete loser. Lost everything in that stupid crypto scheme. We'll be staying here now." She took another sip, her lipstick leaving a scarlet smudge on the glass. I stood there, my work bag still in hand, trying to process what I was hearing. My parents sat in their usual chairs, looking everywhere but at me. Martha's hands twisted nervously in her lap while John stared out the window. The kids, my niece Amber, 17, and nephew Michael, 15, were sprawled on the floor watching something on their tablets, headphones blocking out the adult conversation. "We'll be staying here?" I repeated slowly, setting my briefcase down with deliberate care. "In the house where I pay all the bills and the loan that you defaulted on?" Diane's face flushed red, the color creeping up her neck. "Oh, here we go. Miss Perfect with her fancy job and her promotion and her perfect daughter. Some of us have actual problems, Carol, actual problems that don't involve color-coding our financial spreadsheets." I could feel my blood pressure rising, the familiar tension headache beginning to form behind my eyes. Like taking out a huge loan in our parents' name and then not paying it? That kind of problem? Or abandoning your children's college funds for yet another get-rich-quick scheme? That problem? "Girls, please," Mom interrupted, finally finding her voice. She looked smaller somehow, caught between her two daughters. "We're family. We need to stick together in times like these." I let out a harsh laugh that surprised even me. Funny how family becomes important when you need something. Where was this family spirit when you gave away my college fund, or when you didn't even attend my graduation because Diane had a spa weekend planned? "That was years ago," Mom snapped, her voice sharpening. "Why can't you let it go? Your sister needs us now." I looked at Dad, hoping for some support, but he just sat there, his shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on his worn slippers. The fire chief, who once commanded a station of 50 men, couldn't even look his younger daughter in the eye. Tensions escalate, the next few weeks were tense. Diane sprawled on the couch all day, texting and watching TV, wine glass never far from her hand. Her kids ran wild through the house, making messes they never cleaned up, leaving dishes in the sink, towels on the bathroom floor. But what really got to me was how my parents changed. Suddenly, Sarah was invisible to them. When she tried to show Grandma her acceptance letter to the state university with a pre-med scholarship, Mom just waved her away, too busy helping Michael with his video game. When Sarah asked Dad for their weekly chess match, he said he was too tired, right before spending 2 hours playing catch with Amber in the backyard. "Mom," I confronted her one evening after Sarah went to bed. I found her in the kitchen, making a late-night snack for Diane, who was watching reality TV in the living room. "What's going on? Why are you treating Sarah differently?" "Don't be ridiculous," Mom dismissed me with a wave of her hand, not meeting my eyes as she arranged crackers on a plate. "Sarah's older, she doesn't need as much attention. Amber and Michael are younger, they need more support right now. They're going through a difficult transition." "Support?" "Sarah's 19, applying for colleges, planning her future. She needs her grandparents too." I leaned against the counter, trying to make her look at me. "She's spent 3 years building a relationship with you both, and now you're acting like she doesn't exist." "You're overreacting, as usual," Mom said with a sigh. "Sarah's fine. She has you." But Mom had already turned away, hurrying to answer Diane's call for more wine. 2 months crawled by. I threw myself into work, taking extra projects just to avoid being home. The promotion I'd worked so hard for was now a refuge rather than an achievement. Sarah spent more time at the hospital volunteering, extending her hours to avoid coming home to a house where she was suddenly an afterthought. Diane still hadn't looked for a job, claiming she was recovering from emotional trauma, and my parents seemed fine with it. Every time I brought it up, they defended her. "She's going through a difficult time," Dad would say, his voice tired. "She has the children to think about," Mom would add, as if Sarah wasn't also a child, their grandchild. Meanwhile, I was still paying for everything: the loan, the bills, the groceries that seemed to disappear twice as fast now. But money wasn't what bothered me most. It was watching Sarah become a ghost in her own home. The breaking point then came that Wednesday. I had come home early, hoping to take Sarah for dinner at her favorite Italian restaurant, our little escape when things got too tense at home. I heard the shouting before I even opened the front door. "You lazy, good-for-nothing brat." Diane's voice echoed through the house, slurred with afternoon wine. "Look at this mess. Clean it up right now." I rushed inside to find Diane standing over Sarah, who was on her knees picking up scattered papers and books, her medical school application essays and recommendation letters lying crumpled on the floor. My daughter's face was flushed with humiliation, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "What's going on here?" I demanded, dropping my purse on the entryway table with a thud. "Your precious pre-med princess refuses to help around the house," Diane spat, gesturing wildly at the mess. A half-empty wine glass dangled precariously from her other hand. "She thinks she's too good to clean up after her cousins. Just like her mother, always thinking she's better than everyone else." "After her cousins?" I looked at the scattered papers again, recognizing Sarah's careful handwriting on some of the pages that had clearly been stepped on. "You mean your kids destroyed Sarah's college application materials? Where are they, by the way?" "They're at the mall with Mom," Diane said dismissively, taking another sip of wine. "Someone has to keep those kids entertained, and since you're never here." She waved her hand toward me, wine sloshing over the rim. "I'm never here because I'm working," I exploded, moving to help Sarah gather her papers, my hands shaking with rage. Unlike some people who lie around all day drinking wine and expecting everyone else to support them and their children. The argument that followed was ugly. Diane ran to our parents when they returned, crying about how I was bullying her, how I'd always been jealous of her, how difficult her life was now. And they took her side. Of course they took her side, just like they had 20 years ago, just like they always would. "Carol, you need to be more understanding," Mom pleaded, her hand resting on Diane's shoulder in that familiar protective gesture I'd seen my entire life. "Diane's children. What about my child?" I interrupted, gesturing to Sarah, who stood silently by the stairs, clutching her damaged application papers. "What about Sarah? She works hard, she volunteers at the hospital, she's applying to medical schools, and you let Diane treat her like this?" But they didn't answer. They never did when it came to choosing between Diane and me. I thought that was bad, but I had no idea what was coming. The crisis, the following week, I had to fly to Seattle for an emergency meeting with a major client. It was only supposed to be for 5 days. 5 days that would change everything. "You'll be okay?" I asked Sarah for the 100th time at breakfast, my stomach twisting with anxiety about leaving her alone with Diane and the others. "You have your key to Maria's house if you need to get away." "I'll be fine, Mom," she assured me, trying to smile but not quite meeting my eyes. "I've got my phone. We can video chat every night. And I'll be at the hospital most of the time anyway." 4 days into my trip, around 9 p.m. Seattle time, my phone rang. Sarah's picture flashed on the screen. The moment I answered, I knew something was terribly wrong. "Mom," her voice was small, broken by sobs that tore at my heart. "Mom, I'm at Maria's. Aunt Diane," she went through my things. She found my acceptance letter and scholarship offer. She tore up my medical school application files. She said I was wasting my time, that the family couldn't afford to help me, that I was selfish for not getting a job to help with bills instead. The world stopped spinning. My 19-year-old daughter's future was being systematically destroyed by my sister, just as mine had been 20 years ago. History was repeating itself in the cruelest way possible. "Then Grandma took her side," Sarah continued, her voice breaking. "She said maybe Diane was right, that medical school was too expensive and too much of a burden on the family. Mom, all my recommendation letters, my personal statements, they're ruined. The application deadline is next week." With shaking hands, I called Diane. She answered on the 5th ring, sounding annoyed. "Oh, did the princess call you?" "She's being dramatic." Maybe now she'll learn not to be so obstinate, always arguing, always thinking she's better than everyone else with her fancy medical school dreams. The family needs her income now, not more expenses. I hung up and called my parents. Mom answered. Your granddaughter's medical school applications have been destroyed, I said, my voice cold and steady despite the rage burning inside me. Did you know that? Did you watch while Diane tore up her future, just like you watched when you gave away my college fund 20 years ago? There was a pause, then Mom's voice hardened. Maybe it's better this way, Carol. The family needs to focus on Diane right now. She and the kids need our support. Sarah can apply next year, or find a more practical career. Maybe you and Sarah should find somewhere else to live. You don't really fit here anymore. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. Some things never change. Some people never change. 20 years had passed, and nothing was different. I was still the afterthought, and now my daughter was too. You're right, Mom, I said quietly. We don't fit there. We never did. I hung up and booked the first flight home. It was time to end this cycle once and for all. The return, the flight home, was the longest 5 hours of my life. Maria sent me updates about Sarah every half hour, but I couldn't rest until I could hold my daughter in my arms. When I finally got to Maria's house at 3 a.m., Sarah was asleep on the couch, dried tear tracks still visible on her cheeks. The sight of her, curled up like she used to do as a child, made my heart ache. She told me what happened, Maria whispered as I stroked Sarah's hair, her dark strands slipping through my fingers. The kitchen light cast long shadows across the living room. Carol, it's worse than you think. According to Sarah, Diane had been going through her things for weeks, making comments about how her medical school ambitions were selfish and unrealistic. Maria leaned closer, her voice dropping lower. Diane told Sarah that you were wasting family money on her education when it should be going to help her cousins. She said terrible things about you too, that you were showing off with your promotion, that you thought you were better than everyone else. I closed my eyes, the familiar pain washing over me. What about my parents? What did they do? Nothing, Maria said simply. They watched it happen. When Sarah tried to stand up for herself, your mother told her she needed to learn her place in the family hierarchy. Those were her exact words. I let Sarah sleep and spent the night making calls, first to my rental agency, explaining the situation and asking them to help me end the current tenant's lease early, then to my lawyer, asking about my rights regarding the appliances and furniture I bought for my parents' house, finally to a moving company. By dawn, I had a plan. The next morning, I took Sarah to breakfast at her favorite diner. The place was nearly empty at 7 a.m., giving us the privacy we needed. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but there was a determined set to her jaw that reminded me of myself. Sarah, I need you to be honest with me, I said, watching her pick at her pancakes. Has this happened before? Has Diane hurt you before? Sarah's silence told me everything. She pushed her food around the plate, not meeting my eyes. She said I was just like you, pretentious and selfish, she finally whispered. That I thought I was better than her kids with my hospital volunteering and academic awards. Grandma said the same thing, that I needed to learn my place, that family meant supporting Diane right now. My hand shook as I gripped my coffee cup. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because you seemed happy, Sarah said, looking up at me with those wise eyes that sometimes made me forget she was only 19. Your promotion, your trips, you were finally doing things for yourself after all those years of just focusing on me. And Grandma and Grandpa, sometimes they were nice when Aunt Diane wasn't around. I thought I could handle it. I reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were cold despite the warm diner. Listen to me, Sarah. Nothing, absolutely nothing, is more important to me than you and your future. Not my parents, not their house, not any of it. We're going home to our apartment, and this time we're staying there. And we're going to get your medical school applications resubmitted if I have to call every administrator and professor personally. The confrontation, after breakfast, we drove to my parents' house. Diane's car was gone, probably on one of her mysterious errands that never seemed to involve job hunting. Mom opened the door, surprise flickering across her face when she saw me. She looked older than she had just 5 days ago, the lines around her mouth deeper. "Carol, we didn't expect you back so soon." Her eyes darted to Sarah, then quickly away, guilt written in the slump of her shoulders. I walked past her without a word, Sarah's hand firmly in mine. The moving crew I'd hired was already waiting outside, their truck parked on the street. "Take everything I bought," I instructed them, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. I pointed at the refrigerator, washing machine, dishwasher, the new couch, the TV, the medical reference books I'd bought for Sarah. "Everything with my name on the receipt goes." I went through the house methodically, pointing at every item I'd purchased over the past 3 years. The new mattress in my parents' room that helped with Dad's back. The TV lift cabinet in the living room. The patio furniture where we'd had so many family dinners. "You can't do this." Mom's voice rose in panic as she followed me from room to room. "We need those things." "Your father's back, actually, I can," I replied calmly, handing the movers my proof of purchase for each item. "I bought them, they're mine. I've arranged for a home health aide to come 3 times a week to help Dad. The service starts tomorrow." Dad came home while the movers were working. He stood in the doorway, watching as they dismantled the entertainment system I bought last Christmas. He looked smaller somehow, his fire chief confidence completely gone. "Carol," he started, leaning heavily on his cane, but I cut him off. "Just don't. You watched Diane destroy Sarah's future. You chose Diane over me again, and this time you chose her over Sarah too. We're done." "But the loan," Mom's voice quivered, her hands twisting her wedding ring. "The bills." I turned to face them both. They stood together near the staircase, suddenly looking every one of their 70-plus years. "You'll have to figure that out yourselves, just like I had to figure out college on my own, just like Sarah had to figure out how to protect herself in what should have been her safe home. Consider this my final payment for all the times you chose Diane over me." New beginnings, the next few months were challenging but liberating. My parents and Diane didn't go down without a fight. The calls started the very next day, first from Mom, then Dad, then Diane, then back to Mom. They left voicemails ranging from angry accusations to tearful pleas. The text messages were worse, screenshots of their overdue bills, photos of Diane's kids looking sad, guilt trip attempts about how they might lose the house. Mom even sent pictures of my old bedroom, as if that would somehow change my mind. "We can work this out," one message read. "Family sticks together. Why don't you answer them?" Sarah asked one evening as my phone buzzed with another message. We were sitting on our apartment's balcony, sharing a pizza and watching the sunset. Our apartment felt different now, smaller than my parents' house, but somehow more spacious, without the weight of their expectations and disappointing history. "Because we don't owe them anything," I replied, silencing the phone. Sometimes the best response is no response at all. Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I miss Grandpa's chess games sometimes," she admitted, taking a bite of pizza. "But not how they made me feel when Aunt Diane came." I pulled her close, feeling her warmth against my side. "We can get you chess lessons if you want. You can learn from someone who won't stop playing with you just because your cousin shows up." Weeks turned into months. Through extended family, I heard updates about my parents' situation. They had gone back to working part-time, Dad doing consulting for the fire department despite his health issues, Mom taking on some substitute teaching. They were struggling to pay their bills. The bank was threatening foreclosure because they couldn't make the loan payments. Diane still wasn't working, still complaining about me to anyone who would listen. I heard she'd started dating a divorced doctor, her next potential financial savior. I used the money I'd been spending on my parents' bills to help Sarah reapply to medical schools instead. We took weekend trips to tour university hospitals. Without the constant drama of my parents' house, I could focus more on my work while actually spending quality time with my daughter. Sarah's grades improved even further. Without Diane's kids interrupting her study time, she aced her MCAT and received acceptance letters from 3 medical schools, including one with a substantial scholarship. Sometimes I caught her looking at old photos from our time at my parents' house, but she never asked to go back. One Sunday morning, almost a year after we'd left, I was making breakfast when Sarah came into the kitchen looking thoughtful. She'd just returned from an overnight hospital volunteering shift, her scrubs exchanged for comfortable weekend clothes. "Mom, are you happy now?" she asked, leaning against the counter. I stopped whisking the eggs and really thought about it. Was I happy? Happy that I'd walked away from a toxic situation, happy that I'd protected my daughter, happy that I'd finally broken free from the pattern of always being second best? Yes, I said finally, feeling the truth of it settle in my chest. I am. Are you? Sarah smiled, that bright, unworried smile I hadn't seen in years, the one that reminded me of when she was a little girl, before she understood the complexities of family dysfunction. Yeah. I like it being just us. And next year, medical school. She reached for a piece of toast. Thank you for choosing me, Mom. For making my future a priority. Later that day, I deleted all my parents' and Diane's numbers from my phone. I kept their voicemails though, stored in a folder labeled Never Again, a reminder of why we left, in case I ever started to doubt myself. I heard through Maria that the bank finally foreclosed on my parents' house. They moved into a small apartment, and Diane found someone else to mooch off of, her new doctor boyfriend apparently. Sometimes I wonder if they ever really understood what they did wrong, or if they're still telling themselves that I'm the selfish one. But honestly, I don't care anymore. Sarah and I might be a small family, but we're a real one. We support each other's dreams, celebrate each other's victories, and never make each other feel less than. We travel when we want, laugh when we want, and never have to apologize for taking up space in our own home. The money I used to spend on my parents' bills now goes into Sarah's medical school fund, and this time nobody's going to give it away for someone else's benefit. At 55, I've finally learned that family isn't about blood or obligation, it's about choice. And I choose Sarah, I choose myself, I choose breaking the cycle of putting Diane first. And in that choice, I've found the peace I've been searching for since I was 35 years old, standing on my parents' doorstep with my dreams in pieces around me.